Hi, welcome, it's Kenton here again. You're joining me at my little pop-up gallery here in the marketplace in Morpeth, and this is a painting that I've been working on this last week of the beach of Bamburgh with the Bamburgh Castle in the distance. The story behind this painting was I actually went to Bamburgh on the end of December, and it was quite an unusual day because it was warm. It was about 10 degrees. So it should have been freezing in the middle of December, but it was actually quite warm. And I was sketching on the beach, so I've done a number of pieces over the last few months. So from pen and ink sketches, from watercolours, building up to this. And this is the image that I had, that I wanted to achieve from that visit that I had. I've got a full painting demonstration of how I made this with some blending techniques. This is all in acrylic, so to how I've managed to get this nice soft sky. So watch along and we'll see you at the end of the video.
So I'm starting off with a pencil sketch. Because I've done this quite a few times, there wasn't a photo reference, but essentially most of it's from memory. So I started off with a little pencil sketch and used my finger along the bottom of the canvas just to get a nice straight line in. And then once I was happy with the pencil sketch, I went over with an acrylic marker pen, put the underwash in, and this is just to kind of start to establish some tones. I also had a little bit of ultramarine blue to the mix just at the end here, just to darken it down a little bit further. The initial idea was to bring the shoreline right in, but actually when you're standing on that beach, it very rarely goes in that far. So I abandoned that idea in the finished painting, and then it's a case of putting the sky in. So because I'm working with acrylics, this is obviously speeded up, but I do have to work pretty quick because I want to blend in the colours, and I knew when I put the underpainting in that there was a couple of light sort of patches to the sky that I wanted to leave. Like I say, I'm not working on any photo reference here whatsoever. I'm just getting this sky in and get a kind of feel for it and see where it goes from there. Sometimes the skies don't work out well. On this occasion, in fact, this whole painting, everything worked in pretty much perfectly. There wasn't any little major corrections or anything that I had to make with it. I started off with the lightest patch and then worked my way out of there, just using a combination of raw umber, blue and white, just to kind of grey off the blue a little bit. And like I say, working fairly quickly, just cutting up to the edge of the drawing that I did of the castle, and keeping everything blended. I give it a little spritz with a fine mist spray occasionally just to keep everything wet. You could just about see that. Obviously it's a speeded up process, so it's difficult to see. Well, I had that still on the brush. I put the big puddle in, which is going to be a nice little device for adding the reflection from the castle, which I wanted to do. And this was still fairly wet, but I went over the top with some lighter shades just to start establishing the forms of the clouds. Again, sorry if I keep reiterating this, but this is all just from memory, but and I would struggle to paint this whole painting again, I think, really, because they always come out slightly differently, which is the beauty of working from memory or just working sort of spontaneously. So once all of that in, it still looks a little bit messy at this stage, but I'm still working. I had just a little bit of play in the paint just to keep things going while things were wet. So once that was done, I did have to eventually stop because you can't keep working over and over again once the paint starts to go a little bit tacky. So that whole process took around about 20-30 minutes. Once that had dried, then I sort of sat back and had a good look at it and started to look and see where I wanted to define some of these shapes and make them into cloud shapes. So that's always a good opportunity. I like to just sit down, let everything dry off for a little bit. Like I say, I can't keep working on it all the time. Eventually it starts to tack over a little bit. So as I sat there with a cup of coffee, and I could see some of the blends that I've put in were kind of giving me the impression of clouds and where the clouds were going to be and where the highlights were going to be, so the light was coming through from the right hand side. So then I just kept the mix going with the grey sort of bluey colour, and then just started building that up. You'll notice because I'm working on clouds, I don't want to have that angular look of the flat brush. I'm quite a big fan of the flat brush, but I wanted just to give these a nice sort of round edge, so I've swapped over to a bristle round brush for putting these in. I've included this bit in real time. Quite often when I do these paint along videos, I speed everything up, and I guess it's a case of wanting to try and keep it interesting for you, the viewer, but I think sometimes it's worth seeing the actual process of this. And I just slowly work my way through, using the brush fairly dry because I don't want to put big blobs of opaque paint on, and that just helps to sort of give that nice soft feel to the edge of the clouds. So once that was all in, start filling in some of the details of the castle, using my finger there just to smudge out the edges a little bit. I'm just using I'm again using my finger there just to smudge it out. That's a little tree. There's a tree on each side of the castle, which I observed when I was doing my sketches there. And yeah, I'm just taking my time, putting some paint across this little edge of dunes. I'm not worrying too much about the colour, it's more of just getting some paint on, getting a tone. Eventually do go over this a few times and blue it up a little bit. Let's speed this up a little bit and finish this off, this little headland and the castle in the grey-blue mix. There we go. When I put these trees in, I don't think I've caught this on the camera here, but I've added some little air holes just to give the feeling of the sky coming through, just to make that clear that they are trees on the side. You can see them just about in there. I still had some of that bluey grey mixture on the palette, so I was wanting to put the reflections in of the castle because that was quite a key part of the image that I wanted to achieve. So here I'm just keeping the brush horizontal because the water is always horizontal, so your reflections will always be horizontal, and then just use my finger just to drag that down a little bit. If I was working in oils, for example, I could have smudged that a little bit easier because the blue would have been wet still. But I was pleased with the finished result of this in the end. I had another little break and it was time to start blocking in the sand colour and the beach. This is where I decided that what I'll do is get some reflections going, as if the tide was out and it left that pool of water which we've got the reflections in, but then I wanted to use that sand, just have some very wet sand, so that's when I'll start putting some reflections into that wet sand that I've put in there. And the distant sea, you can just see a little bit of that going in. And on this particular day, around about 4 o'clock, when the sun was just going down because it was in the winter, the sunlight just lit up the castle quite harshly from the right hand side, and then left a little band of lit sand, so I added that in, and that highlighted some of those dunes, so that just gave a nice little burst of light in there. Then I had to start putting in some of this dune grass just to give some foreground interest, so I'm starting off with quite a dark mix of raw umber and blue, and just using a bristle brush and flicking that up just to give the appearance of the grass. This is like the underneath of the grass. I'll go over the top of this with a farm brush as well, just to pick out the details, but that's kind of like the shadow underneath. And then what I do is start filling that in, just constantly dipping into the palette, mixing the colors a little bit as I go, just to give a little bit of variation. And as you can see, the farm brush makes a nice job of that. I've just speeded this process up a little bit, and I wanted to keep things nice and light along the top, just to give the impression of the sun which was just catching that top layer of grass along the top there. So it was just a case of building that up. Once that was in, there was also the shaft of light that was coming through was lighting up the grass on the top of the dunes there, so I'll put that in, and finished off a little with some more details around the grass of the around the dunes, some more shadow details. And then I wanted to add some reflections of the clouds onto this wet sand that I'd put in, again using the big flat brush and then just pulling that down with my finger. So I just went over that with the small flat brush just to break that reflection up a little bit, just to give some little bit of life to the water, and then finished off a few. I did have another quick look at the reference photograph just to see where the light was catching the castle, and there's a couple of little sort of turret things at the top there, and I just felt everything was a little bit greyish, so I just wanted to warm it up with a little bit of purpley blue in the castle, and I brought that shadow colour down onto the dunes. And last but not least, this is speeded up because it actually was quite a tedious little process, is put some figures in just to give a sense of scale to this painting. So this is really quite an impressive castle and a huge expansive beach, so I'll put some little figures in there just to give a little sense of scale, and I'll put a few little extra figures in.
Thanks for watching. If it's the first time you've been to this channel, welcome along. If you've been before, welcome back. And if you enjoyed that video and seen that painting demonstration, please consider giving this a little thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks, and we will see you next time. Bye.